Well, welcome everyone to the Jacksonville Urban League monthly conversation on racial healing and reconciliation. And we're really pleased to have all of you with us tonight and our special guest, Chester Aikens II. I was privileged to be able to work with his father. In fact, he was a student of mine at the Florida Coastal School of Law. And it was a wonderful experience. And later on, he became my dentist. And Chester was chief office manager, I would call him, running the place. And it was a great dentistry. And unfortunately, his father passed away, and we all miss him. But he was a trailblazer, fighting for civil rights, and was able to break the color barrier at the Florida Yacht Club, among other things. So it was a real pleasure to know him. And Chester has really become involved in very similar arena as an aide to a Councilwoman Joyce Morgan. And I know that if any time I needed to get something done, I could call Chester. Things happened. So Chester, welcome. I also want to recognize a Raven Countryman, our coordinator of interns at the Urban League, and of course, William Malone, my partner, and actually the founder of our monthly conversation. William, did you want to say anything before?
No, I'm just looking forward to Chester's talk, and I was glad to learn about what his father accomplished at the Florida Yacht Club. I used to be a member there, and I remember that they were not very open.
Well, thank you. Chester, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dean Stone. I always call you Dean Stone because that's what my father called you when he was your student. But thank you so much for having me this evening. And thank you so much to you as well, Mr. Malone, for also inviting me. I know you originally wanted my Councilmember Morgan, who actually is a property appraiser elect Morgan, but unfortunately she was unable to switch some things in her schedule. So I guess you have the next best thing, which would be me. So I'm honored that you would even consider me to come and give a few remarks. I want to start out to introduce myself. My name is Chester Aikens II. I'm from Jacksonville, born and raised in the Arlington area. I attended Duval County Public Schools all the way up, and I ended up finishing from Paxton School for the Advanced Studies. I actually was in the first graduating class of the prep school, Paxton School for Advanced Studies. After Paxton, I ended up attending the Florida State University. I finished in, I guess back in 2004, I majored in business management. And then after that, I decided that I wanted to follow my father's footsteps and become a dentist. So I came back to Jacksonville and I worked in my father's dental office. So that's when I got to know my good friend, attorney or Dean Stone or President Stone, where he would come to get his teeth, cleaned every 6 months. He was really good about that. So I worked in this office, I shadowed him. And during that time, I took dental school prerequisites. So I ended up taking, biology and chemistry and general chemistry and anatomy, physiology and orgochem and the whole 9 yards in preparation for dental school. I ended up taking the DAT a couple of times, and I actually was waitlisted a couple of times at Meharry, I think in Howard way back, and I ended up not getting into dental school, and I ended up which actually probably was one of the best situations, or one of the most life-changing or probably a blessing in disguise. My father ended up passing away a few years later. And I think that experience kind of, not necessarily opened my eyes, but it was a good teaching experience to learn, how things may not go your way. So up until this point in my life, things had kind of gone smoothly. I ended up going to a magnet prep school, did well at college and all of that. But that dental school experience, or not getting into dental school, kind of taught me or strengthened my work ethic when I look back later on, especially after my father died. So moving forward, after my father passed away, I had interest in politics. I had interest in serving the community and interest in giving back. My dad was a person who was very involved in the community. And so I was able to secure a role at the first African-American mayor in Jacksonville, Mayor Alvin Brown. So I worked in his administration as a staffer to Mia Jones, who was over the boards and commissions. And I also worked with a lady by the name of Betsy Santiago, who was the international officer. So she was over the mayor's Hispanic advisory board. She was over the mayor's Asian American advisory board. And she was basically somebody that was, tasked with making sure that everybody was inclusive and everybody had their voice heard in the mayor's office, the executive of the city. So it was a great experience. I learned a lot. Unfortunately, I came in towards the end of his term, and he lost his election in 2015 by maybe like a point or two. So after that, I ended up leaving the mayor's office when Mayor Curry came in, and I took a job teaching. I had a buddy of mine who was at a school called the Young Men's and Young Women's Leadership Academy, who he was an assistant principal, and he needed a leadership teacher. And my mom was a teacher, my aunts were teachers, my grandmother was a teacher. And during that time when I was trying to get a dental school, I taught civics, not civics, but biology and life sciences for the FCAT. So I had a little taste of teaching, and I thought that it would be a good opportunity to learn more about myself and maybe give back. And the experience was, it was so worthwhile, and it was so rich because, I was tasked with teaching students, but the students and the situation ended up teaching me so much about life and so much about some of the issues, inequalities, equity, a lot of the things that are talked about on the series of First Thursday Zoom sessions. So my first year, again, I was at the YWLA Leadership Academy, which is the former Eugene Butler. And it was, it was set up where the boys were upstairs and the girls were downstairs. And I had girls on Mondays and Wednesdays, or boys on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or it was broken up kind of like in college, 2 days, 3 days, alternating. And I had an opportunity to teach young people about leadership. So, during those days, or during that time, I had a lot of freedom and a lot of creativity for my class. So I remember teaching the students about Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, and even people like Ralph Bunche, or Madam C.J. Walker for the young ladies, and even people like Allison Felix, who was a sprinter. We did the whole spectrum of different people who are leaders in their own right, and teaching them, the students, how, it doesn't matter where their circumstances are, or where what zip code they were born into, or what have you. I gave real life examples of how people, came from, whatever, and were able to rise to make a difference, trying to pour into them that, they too could aspire, for greatness, because greatness was in each of them. So it was like, again, a great year. That was my first year. My second year, I taught at Fort Caroline Middle School, which was up the street, right down the street from my house. And I was a government teacher, which was kind of went back to what I started doing with the mayor. So I spent 3 years in the Duval County Public Schools. Again, very rich, a very meaningful time where I learned way more than the kids. Obviously, I hope the kids learn, but I learned so much about myself, so much about the community, so much about some of the challenges that people face that maybe I didn't face when I grew up. I was blessed to have, a 2-parent household. Both parents were educated, went to church on Sundays. And, I knew that wasn't the case for everybody. I understood that, but, teaching in the school every day, seeing students that, might have lived in a shelter, or seeing students that may not have known, their meals came from the school, or are having issues with, even a rat in the classroom, or things like that. It really was eye-opening. So then I ended up moving to City Council to work with Councilman Morgan in District 1, which is the Arlington area. And again, this experience, which I currently am serving, has shaped me, but it's allowed me to take the experiences from the office, seeing from the healthcare side, to seeing the education side, and now seeing it from a legislative standpoint. It's kind of come full circle. We had one bill right before COVID dealing with the half-penny sales tax. And it was interesting hearing, council members, people with ideas, people from the community say things that kind of, weren't true, if that makes sense. They was like, oh, well, what about the lottery money, or what about this money? And it was interesting hearing people that were in the community say things, or maybe not necessarily be informed with what's actually going on. And so it really kind of opened my eyes, because I was like, well, that's not necessarily true. Like, the kids, don't have this. Well, all schools aren't the same. A school in this zip code may not be the same as a school in this zip code. Or why are there these types of schools here? Are there not, these types of schools here? Or, those types of questions I would ask myself. Or why are these types of schools popping up, here? Or, and it showed me. And so with that sales tax, the first time around, it didn't pass. And, to me, out of all the legislation that I've been a part of, or watched at City Council over the last 4 years, that was probably the most frustrating. JEA was bad, but not passing the sales tax, because remember I said, in my leadership class downstairs, we actually had a resident rat that actually lived in the class, right? So hearing people say, oh, the schools have money, or this, that, and the third. And I remember, rats being in the school, and these taxes or monies from this, levy tax would go to school facilities, right? When a lot of people on the council had their kids at Bowles or Bishop Kenny or Episcopal, which nothing wrong with that. And they're voting no, really kind of was like, that doesn't really necessarily all make sense to me. And, those experiences moving forward let me understand, it's like, well, where do I fit in? How do I make a difference, right? And so, again, this has been over the last 4 years. During COVID, I ended up going to work on my business degree at the University of Florida. I've just finished in December. And now that the council member's term is up, I feel that the next step in my journey is to look for a position in the private sector where, it will give me even more knowledge, such that hopefully in the next, 10, 15 years, I will be able to, I've made a difference where I've been, but I'll even be able to make more of a difference. But I wanted to kind of circle back with, the comments, or the theme of tonight, which is racial healing, reconciliation, and equity, and kind of open it up to the group. I would be lying if I said that I had all the answers and I could sit here and say, these are the things, because in all actuality, I'm trying to figure it out myself. I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas. I've seen a lot of things, but I think that, I wanted to, ask 3 questions, 3 or 4 questions that I kind of posed to see what you think. And I guess I'm not sure who's manning the Zoom, but we could kind of raise our hands and maybe, 20, 30 second, answers and kind of go around the room around the Zoom call. So the first thing I wanted to ask was, we just had an election, and it seemed that when you look at the zip codes in District 7, 8, 9, and 10, which were more in the inner city, the turnout wasn't as expected. We made strides and we had progress electing our first female mayor, and we made strides electing our first African-American female constitutional officer, which was great. But some of that was because I feel like our candidates we had quality candidates who were able to, I guess, speak to the whole city and were able to cross party lines, so to speak. But if you look at the data, we still have challenges getting people in our communities, to come out to vote. And I was kind of wanted to ask around the room, does anybody have any answers why? Not all at once. Mr. Malone?
I don't have answers. I have frustrations.
Frustrations?
With people in politics doing some things that are not in line with, I think, what our country's traditions have been. I think we're suffering from a couple of things. One is people turning away from faith. Okay. And there are bad consequences of that. All we have to do is read the Old Testament and see what happened. But also, I thought I was tremendously happy to see our new mayor, who operates from love, which conquers all kinds of things. I think we're going to be blessed during this next few years as a city, and maybe realize some potential we've been talking about, but maybe haven't really uncovered.
I agree. Is anybody else want to chime in on Mr. Malone's comments?
Hi, my name is Selena Mendez, and I feel that maybe the reason why it was a low turnout in the inner city, maybe because people feel, I don't know why, that their vote doesn't count.
Right.
But it counts. In order to make a change, you have to take that effort to make a change. You have to get out and vote. So I think that may be some of the people mentality that, my vote doesn't count.
Right. Anybody else?
So I think,
well, I will agree. I'm sorry.
So
Go ahead, Ms. Thrasher.
Yeah, Charmian Thrasher here. So I actually worked with Jacksonville Urban League last fall as their organizing manager for the Reclaim Your Vote initiative. So I do think there are a couple things that kind of affect the voter turnout. Like Ms. Mendez said, I definitely think that people don't understand, that their vote matters. A lot of things that I encountered, just being out in the community is that, people don't think that their vote counts. And if they did vote in the past, they feel like they didn't see, any changes or any results from voting. And then also, another thing I think really affects voter turnout, and I don't think we talk about this enough, is just kind of the technological disparity within voting itself. The fact that it is not super easy to vote. And we know that that's been done strategically, over time. But I just think that, especially for younger generations, there needs to be a little more implementation of, technology and digital, digital options, making voting more accessible and easier for people.
Okay. Mr. Williams, did you have a comment?
Well, I think everyone has pretty much touched on what are the systemic issues and concerns. But when you do not feel that you are part of what's going on in the community, or you feel that your community is not an intrinsic part of the city, then people, it seems, don't have that incentive to be participants in this democracy. And so we do have an opportunity with the election of the new mayor to do some things different. So we'll see with her appointments, we'll see with her budget, we'll see with the interest that she pays to those parts of the community that have not been, a part of the process. So we're a little optimistic about that. But after the election, when I read some of the comments in the on the various like News 4, she's going to still face some a very difficult time. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because the other side is not going to give her a free pass.
Okay. Well, I will say this, serving in the last Democratic mayor, not that, the Urban League is nonpartisan, but, just being in city council and kind of understanding how, things kind of go in waves and go up and down and as the country goes. The thing that I would say could be a challenge is people expecting change overnight. Sometimes we have you can correct me if I'm wrong, but people say, okay, we have, this person in, and so, you want to see a wave of magic wand and things, are different or could be different. And it just doesn't work like that. A lot of times, unfortunately, change is slow, especially when we look at, inequities or challenges that have been plagued for 50 plus years, like with consolidation. We've had issues that have been plagued in some communities for years and years and years. And it's going to take, years and years and years to fix. Like if you, like I said, I just went to business school, and the fundamental principle of business is, time value of money. So if you invest, X amount of dollars, if, let's say you have a half penny sales tax that we've been investing or taking this tax for 50 years, right? Then we're gonna have a lot more money if we start today. So all that money that could have been generated just by a half a penny or what have you, will not necessarily be realized, starting from 2023, if that makes sense. So when you look at cities like a Tampa or Orlando or even, Miami, because Florida still is the lowest tax state in the country, and Jacksonville is probably the lowest tax big city in the state. And then you look at the roads or the medians in Orlando. I was just taking my son to Disney World this past weekend, and I know they have issues with bed taxes and where they have probably a little more revenue to make the medians look nicer with the trash and things, but there is a difference in some other communities than in Jacksonville. So it's just kind of like, well, just because you elect somebody, we can't expect for things to change like overnight. And I think maybe Mr. Williams might have said something, I'm touching on this, is that, or maybe it was Ms. Thrasher, but, the young people, the issue with me is that, there are issues with getting people to the polls, but I see the older generations, going to the polls, where I see the younger people not. Maybe it's because they were there and they saw the issues back in the 60s or in Jim Crow and things like that, but I just see a lot of young people detached. And to bring that full circle, it's like a lot of the younger people are people that, like when I was, we want those youngsters to be able to, I'm 40, but people who are in their 20s to, be able to go to law school or business school or dental school or, medical school and these types of things, and be a part of a productive member of society, open their own businesses, those types of things. And a coworker of mine said that, government's in everything. No matter if you're a dentist, a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, because, the government sets the rules. So the zoning rules, the professional standards, even we see at the University of Florida that, DE&I has been taken out of schools. So that's a big hit, if that makes sense. So all that's government. So it's just, if you have a young person, and I guess maybe people who are 17 and 18 17 can't vote, but if you're 18 and 19 and you're going to college and you are African American, and I was just at the University of Florida just less than a year ago, and we had 100 people, and then maybe like 3 or 4 African Americans in that 100 people cohort of students. And it's just kind of like, well, you know, Accenture, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, Disney Company, they're going to be looking at the University of Florida, which I guess, quote unquote, is the flagship school, and they're getting these students from this program, and then that's not going to be diversity. And to me, again, I'm nowhere near where I want to be from a standpoint of my vocation or that, but I have seen things, and it's like, well, where's that disconnect? How can that student who might be in college understand that this is a big deal, if that makes sense? And I just think that it's hard to connect those dots for people. And, you know, I saw it firsthand with my father, where he would work 2 or 3 times as hard than the average dentist in another area of town, because people couldn't get off. People would come after they get off of work. People would come to the office and their insurance wasn't as good as somebody else in another area. And so you have to drill a lot of teeth and fill a lot of teeth and pull a lot of teeth in order to make your payroll, or order to, you know, pay the crowns, which are the same price no matter where you go. So I know I'm kind of digressing, but the second question I wanted to ask, and this is kind of like a young professional question I know this is not the urbanly young professionals, but do you think that Jacksonville is a city that is favorable for people who are young people? So I would say people under 35. Is this a city that you think that somebody who's under 35 would want to come and want to stay in? That's number one. Because, you know, the people who are 35 and younger, in my opinion, are the lifeblood of the city, if that makes sense. So I know the University of Florida is supposed to be building a fintech campus to the city and things like that. But when you look at your Charlottes and your Nashvilles and these other cities that are kind of in comparable size, you see things that are geared to young people. And I wanted to ask, particularly even African American, but do you think that Jacksonville is gearing itself to make sure that we still have, you know, the lifeblood of young people moving forward? And, you know, I'll open that up.
I can speak on that. Specifically in Jacksonville is very unique to the fact that there is a large group of young Black professionals, you know, here in the city who are doing some amazing things and doing some amazing work. Now, just kind of correlating that to voting and, you know, handling your civic responsibility, I think that group of young professionals but there's still a lot of, you know, younger people here that just, I think it really goes back to the lack of technology in voting.
Right.
There's a certain generation, especially, I'm a millennial. So if you're younger than me, then going to the polls is not necessarily going to work for you, because you are really of the digital age at that point. And so if there is no option to vote digitally, or a more convenient way to vote, I think that's where we're losing a lot of, you know, Gen Z and so on.
Okay, that's fair. Anybody else?
Point of information, Chester, the the median age in Jacksonville is 35.9.
Mhm.
And the median age for Black Americans in Jacksonville is 32.6.
Could you compare that to like a Charlotte, or I wonder what, or a Nashville or a Austin, Texas? Like that's what I was saying is that I know a lot of people that use the city as a stepping stone. And what I'm saying is that, you know, people who come to CSX, I have a friend of mine actually met in the dental office at my dad's, and he's the first African-American general counsel of an NHL hockey team. And he's a year older than me. He is from Oakland. He went to Morehouse, went to Duke for law school. Actually went to Thomas Cooley first transferred to Duke. But
Wow.
he, and I'll tell you the story behind that. He met the dean, and the dean of the school, who actually is now the dean of Southern, I think, Southern University, met him and saw something in him and said, you know what, I'm going to give you a shot. Did well, but now he's the GC of the Charlotte, no, not Charlotte. He was at Charlotte. He was the assistant general counsel of the Charlotte Hornets. Now he's the general counsel of the Chicago Blackhawks. And they did a write-up in the American Bar Association magazine and all this stuff. But that's like case in point of like how DE&I is really important. And it's just, you know, if it weren't for the dean, you know, may not have been able to, you know, go to Duke, which was life-changing for him. And, you know, bringing it back, it's just that one thing that I see in the city are that people are, you know, come here, work at CSX, maybe work here, and then move to Atlanta, DC, Philly, or cities maybe that might be more appealing or might feel that, okay, I don't want to live here. It's kind of too slow, or it's X, Y, whatever. And I think that, you know, working in government, you have to figure out a way to keep people here, like everybody here. And from my friends who are white and my friends who are Black, I feel, from my personal opinion, I feel like there are two perceptions of the city. You know, you have the TPC, and you have the town center, you have Ponte Vedra, and you have golf, and you have people, you know, people love it. Whereas here, people who are African American might not necessarily have the favorable opinion of the city, and might, you know, say, well, I like it here, but I'm trying to move to Atlanta. I'm trying to move to Charlotte. I'm trying to move here, you know, X, Y, and Z, which ties in to the voting, to the equity and those things, because you have a good job, you're able to donate to a campaign, or you're able to, you know, run for an office, or you're able to do X, Y, and Z, then I feel like that rising tide lifts all boats. So I think that, and I don't want to speak, you know, on behalf of anybody, but it just seems that we as a city, in my opinion, have a hard time keeping a lot of people, like everybody from my high school, you know, left the city, you know, and, you know, in Charlotte, you know, Austin, you know, California and things like that. And I feel like you have to have a city that's accommodating for everybody. There were people wanting to stay and want to build and set roots, if that makes sense. So, and the third and final question that I want to ask, and I don't want to be long-winded, is that, you know, we've made some strides, but in 2023 versus, you know, 2020, not 2020, but year 2000, 1980, 1970, or 60, you know, do you think that we've made strides as far as equity? Or do you think we're the same, or do you think we're going backwards or regressing? And I just, you know, that's kind of open-ended, but I did want to get some thoughts on where people think that we are as a society, as a community, and where you think where we're going, and how that, if it's not in the right direction, how can we change that, or their ideas? So really open-ended, but could anybody make any brief comments about that? Have we made strides? Are we going forward? Are we going backwards? Are we at a standstill? Not all at one time.
Well, I was
Go ahead.
at,
Uh-oh.
I teach at the UNF campus. And
Are you frozen?
what's that?
Oh, are we
Oh,
frozen?
yeah. I think I'm on a Ethernet cable, so it's probably your.
It's probably me.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? I hear you now.
Something I tell everybody to do is find out the Ethernet slot in the back of your cable modem and get a wire and plug it in.
Hmm.
And it makes a huge difference. Anyway,
By that.
I have lots of reactions to what's been said, a lot of experience, but one experience I had, which was, it's just, it's so sad, really. I was on the campus at UNF where I teach, in front of the library, and they must have had 40 kids, Black kids, all dressed to the teens, you know, with the right shoes and the right shirts and everything. And I said, where are you guys from? It was clearly a admissions thing.
Hmm.
And they said, we're from Miami. We're up here to visit and tour the school. And I said to myself, that's going to be gone.
Mhm.
That will not happen.
Mhm.
Any money spent for that kind of admissions will be stopped.
Mhm.
Even if they say, well, we asked everybody in Miami, but only these kids showed up. Somebody will write in and say, well, 2/3 of them were minority, and clearly you were biased. I mean, it's just, and that's the whole state we have. That's not Jacksonville. That's the whole state that's causing that problem. The governor
Right.
and the legislature. But I think I don't think people realize how serious what's happened in the last few months, in just in the last month and a half, on what's being taught, on how money's being spent. And so that's a very serious issue. To switch to one other thing, and I'll be quiet. Charlotte was interesting. There are two places in North Carolina that were very progressive. One was the Triangle, Research Triangle, where you had Duke. Very Southern, but very focused on research. And you can't research the way they do at UNC, Chapel Hill, and at Duke, and at North Carolina Central without facing the reality of racism.
Mhm.
And trying to do a difference. And the other place is Charlotte. They called it the great state of Mecklenburg,
Mhm.
Mecklenburg County, which covers Charlotte. And there are people really want to make up for past. They
Mhm.
want to see change. I was very active in the bar association there, and they were very supportive of a law school that I helped get started there that was focused on changing the color of the legal profession. And I had so many people wanting to help out. And we had some great graduates from the city of various educational institutions in Charlotte that went on to do wonderful things. But they were surrounded by other parts of North Carolina that didn't feel the same way. And
Mhm.
so just sharing some experience, what's out there. I have a question for you, but I'll let other people answer the question before we
Okay.
go on. So repeat your question again. So
Yeah, so I just basically want to say we've made strides, but from the civil rights era, from Jim Crow, from the 60s, all the way up to now. But I'm asking, do you feel like we're going in the right direction? Have we stopped? Are we stagnant? Are we going backwards? And if we are going backwards, how far backwards have we gone? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I look at it from 1964 when I first came here.
Mhm.
And the waterfront was a bunch of sheds.
Mhm.
And it was kind of a messy place, but I look at it today, there are some pluses. One of them is it's probably one of the safest places to be in the state of Florida, and in a number of other southern states, from a standpoint of dealing with the environment and the weather. It has a pretty low tax situation, which makes that's a nice feature. I am very hopeful that we're going to see some significant changes with the new mayor, and that we will eventually get a governor who cares more about the people in the state of Florida welfare. I think we got a lot of work to do. Get things where they should be.
Right. Thank you for those comments. Anybody else?
Hi, I had something to add. I'm Raven. I'm 22 years old, so I don't have much experience as others in this conversation. But I did want to just say, like, from a youth outlook, I think representation and community engagement is like really important when we're looking for that voter turnout with the youth in Jacksonville. I also believe there's like a large digital divide between the more adult community and the youth in Jacksonville. Someone spoke to the technological disadvantages experience from the youth, and I believe like the media that we see nowadays is like mainly focused on the elderly population. And I only say that because like articles and news outlets, mainly talk about retirement and, savings and such geared towards like the older population in Jacksonville. And as far as the youth, all I mainly see is like more creative outlets like, music and clubs, and it's not as business oriented. So I think there's some type of divide between, what we're seeing online, as well as the pull from our community. I know a church I attend, we actually have a political action community, and it's a youth organization. And basically we take the church van and we have members at church, follow us to the polls to sign up for registration and also just to get their votes casted. But it's very rare. I don't see a lot of youth, getting excited about it because, politics just isn't as fun if you don't know your place in it.
Right. And the piggyback of what you're saying is that, in my opinion, and I'm 41, and so I don't look at myself as being old, but I'm not as young as you are. But the cool thing about where I'm in my stage of life is that I've been able to, see changes, and I've been able to see, trends and things that I think that are positive and maybe negative. Like I'll give you one example that kind of piggybacks off what Dean Stone said, was that when he was at UNF, so my best friend growing up in high school attended the University of Florida, and he pledged the Zeta Phi chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi. And they had I think it was a 35-year anniversary, or might have 45-year anniversary, I forget the year, but they talked about the fact that in the year maybe 2004, 2005, there was this plan called the One Florida Plan, and what it ended up doing was it essentially sliced the number of African-American students at the university I can have. So if it was 9%, and it was like 4.5%. And you could really see the difference in the lines, the chapter lines. So you had, like 5 or 6 bros, come in 2010 or 2006. Then by 2011, you have, a line of 2 or a line of 3. So it is really interesting to see that. And then it's really interesting also working in government to see the changes with the DE&I, and then piggybacking on the school situation, like, oh, okay, we don't want to raise our taxes for schools, but they don't really know what's going on in schools. And then you'll talk to somebody and say, well, DE&I isn't fair, but they don't actually go into a classroom and say, well, if there are 11% African-Americans in the state, there's 3 in this, in this classroom. So that's, 3%. That's nowhere close to 11%, if that makes sense. So it's just, and go back to what you said, Raven, it's like, well, this is actually affecting the young people, because young people may not even know what's going on, if that makes sense. Because, Dean Stone would tell you, if you want to get hired, say in Jacksonville, you want to get hired at Rogers Towers or Foley and Lardner or Holland and Knight, then, they're going to want you to come from Duke or SAD, at least the University of Florida, right? And if there's no representation there, you can just go to their website and see what it looks like. It doesn't look anything like Jacksonville. And to me, that's kind of the frustration. And, back in, it's coming full circle, it kind of wrapping up our conversation in a bow. I want to thank, you, Attorney Stone, for inviting me, and you as well, Mr. Malone, but I'm nowhere near where I want to be in terms of making change. But if I could change anything or make a difference in anything, that's where I would want to kind of attack, or that's the issue that I would want to kind of address, is at least making Jacksonville look like the percentages or the state of Florida. So what I mean by that is, like, all the liquor stores shouldn't be in one neighborhood, or all the charter schools shouldn't be in one neighborhood, or all the, if you go to a big law firm, it shouldn't look all one way. It should be reflective of the community. The police force should be reflective of the community. Then, you wouldn't have to have taxes because people already have money because they have jobs and they have pensions and everything would work. But in my opinion, I could be wrong, if you don't have access to jobs and you don't have access to education, you don't have access to this, then, you never will be able to participate in the free market enterprise of that America, was designed for. And, trying to see how that, can balance out where everybody can enjoy this beautiful country that we live in is, to me, the challenge. And I just, trying to figure out, where I fit in and how I can kind of move that needle forward. So with that, if there are any other questions for me, or any other comments,
Yeah, I have a question for you, Chester.
Yes, sir.
You are at the heart of our political system here in
Right.
Jacksonville. And
Yes,
you've
sir.
spent a good deal of time
Yes, sir.
at City Hall. And I'm just wondering where you saw positive developments. And what do you think made those things happen when it comes to
Legislation or?
well, helping things get better for the poor, helping things become more equitable? Where did you see it working well and why?
Well, I think that I didn't really, so I'll preface this. I think everybody has great intentions, and I don't want to speak negatively of anybody. And so I'll first say, when I taught at Butler as an African-American, I did not realize, I learned a lot about what a lot of people go through. And just be honest, I was like, okay, well, school looks different in one school zip code than another zip code, so to speak. So, and I'm African-American, and so it just, so I preface that to say, I don't want to attack anybody, because if you're not aware, if you live in a zip code and your streets are fine. There was a council member during this half penny and said, the schools in my district are fine. We don't need to raise a tax because my district are fine. But when you're in some consolidation, if you are in the beach or in Mandarin, we're all in the same pool. If you are in, another district on the east side or out east, so to speak. So I really did not, I think that everybody meant well. And I think that everybody worked hard to the best of their ability. But I don't think, we have parks, put in different areas. There's a park opening off Moncrief for baseball. It's going to be geared towards baseball, AstroTurf. We had AstroTurf in District 1 in our neighborhood. So there were some small steps, but intentional steps that were to really fix issues. I really can't say that as a council, because remember, you can have one or two council people want to do something. You need 10 votes. I really didn't see the type of synergy that you saw like in the state of Mecklenburg County, if that makes sense. And I think that the issue to me is people actually understanding what's going on. Just because you have DE&I isn't going to take away, your child's seat, if that makes sense. If I'm not mistaken, in Texas versus Fisher still went to law school. I think she went to LSU, if I'm not mistaken. So she still got a law degree. She just didn't go to the school that she wanted to go. If I'm not mistaken, I'm just, So you may not get to go to the exact law school that you want to or whatnot, but you're still going to have opportunity to practice, if that makes sense. And I just think that, we have a lot of people posturing, like I feel like Mr. Malone said, for higher offices and things like that. And I think that the boogeyman or doom and gloom sells. But what gives me hope is in this last election, I'll say this, you have in a business, you have an introduction phase, you have a growth phase, you have a maturity and decline. Hopefully the whole negative campaigning is on the decline, because that didn't work for a candidate who by all means was a good candidate in Daniel Davis. Daniel Davis, by all counts, was a good man. I just think that the campaign didn't do him well. And that's obviously Donna took the high road, and he kind of took what the campaign told him. And that didn't work. Didn't work for Jason Fisher either. So hopefully that's on the decline, and we can move forward with people being positive and having a spirit of collaboration moving forward. And maybe I can answer you 4 years from now and say, we did this, and this together, if that makes sense. Just a thought.
Thank you.
Mr. Malone speaking, you have to take it off mute.
You're on mute, William. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. I was saying the major companies are recognizing that if they have a diverse employee base, both in terms of races and sexes and countries of origin, that diversity actually makes them stronger.
100%.
And when that idea gets spread around, people catch on.
100%.
It's much easier to solve some of our problems.
100%. I agree with you 100%. You'll see the biggest, like JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon. If you ever listen to Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan, speak, he speaks to that. And he's a brilliant, great CEO. He's the CEO that, he didn't get caught up in subprime mortgages and things like that, his bank, so to speak. So he has a very successful operation because he embraces diversity. A lot of University of Michigan, Harvard, a lot of these, Berkeley have always embraced different points of view, because just because I see something one way, you might see another way. I have my point of view because of my experiences. You have your point of view because of your experiences. But sometimes, the truth or the best is coming together in collaboration of ideas. So I think we have Ms. Thrasher. Do you want to speak? You have your hand raised.
Yes, so I just wanted to kind of answer the last question that you posed, as far as, where we are in Jacksonville. I definitely think, as a whole, we've moved forward, but I think the state of Florida as a whole, is definitely going backwards. And I say that just because it's so funny, because I was actually having a conversation with someone today who just moved here, and she said to me, "It's so segregated here." And I said, it is. There's a lack of sense of community in Jacksonville specifically. And I think that really ties into, people having a sense of belonging and really feeling like, they play a part, in their community, and their vote, mattering when they go out and vote for someone. So I think that definitely plays a huge part in it. And to what Raven said, as far as just there being a gap between, the younger generation and the older generation in Jacksonville, that is very, very true. And so that is one thing that we've really got to figure out, how to close that gap between the younger generation and the older generation. And too often in Jacksonville, we just see, a lot of situations where, young people are, fired up and wanting to do things, but they're not given the opportunity to even come to the table and have a conversation, and come to some kind of, compromise, happy medium, to move something forward. And so I think in that aspect, we've just got a lot of work to do.
Got it.
Well, I want to thank you, Chester, for being our guest. You've done a marvelous job in getting us to think about issues. And I think the timing was great, because I think a month or two ago, you probably couldn't have said some of the things you said today.
Right.
But that's one of the good things about moving on and getting into a different world. And having known you since you were very, very small. I'm very proud of what you've done and look forward to seeing more great things from you. And we're also wanting to express the gratitude of the Urban League that you've been with us, and appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. And please join us and tell your friends about our monthly conversations. I think this is been one of the most successful.
Thank you so much.
again. Well, everyone have a great evening and a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
All right, goodbye.
All right.
Um,